Fast, high capacity, and beautiful. Ocean liners cut through the ocean and glide quickly and gracefully to their destinations no matter the weather. As the world's tensions grew and war was inevitable, these gorgeous ships would remain at sea, but instead as part of the military. These beautiful ships could mean the difference between victory and defeat during World Wars I and II. Welcome to Fast Facts Friday. My name is Eleanor. Just a quick disclaimer for a younger audience before we dive in. This story may be disturbing to some, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay everyone, let's get into it. When we think of ocean liners being requisitioned and converted for wartime service, most of the time we are looking at ships like RMS Olympic or RMS Aquitania, both repainted and used the way they were built, albeit with interior modifications to best suit wartime service. However, sometimes an ocean liner is completely gutted and rearranged, looking almost unrecognizable. In this week's Shipwreck Sunday episode about the Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft carrier Hyo, we'll look at her conversion from a beautiful ocean liner to a Frankenstein's monster of an aircraft carrier. For now, let's look at common ocean liner conversions for ocean liners during World War I and II. Liners were used extensively on both sides of the war, useful for their large capacity and speed, but limited by their maneuverability. Originally, ocean liners were used as armed merchant cruisers. The idea behind it was that they were quick and large, and therefore would make great warships. They were repainted wartime slate gray or in a dazzle scheme, and then guns were mounted to the decks. However, it was quickly discovered that they were large and awkward in this role, with enormous vulnerable spots amidships that were difficult to defend against nimbler warships and submarines. However, as troop transport ships and hospital ships, these ocean-going beauties shined. They were used for their originally intended roles, transporting large amounts of people over long distances very quickly. To protect them from enemy attack, oftentimes they were painted in gorgeous and interesting patterns known as dazzle paint. The effectiveness of dazzle camouflage has been debated over the years, but regardless of its effectiveness, it's difficult to argue that it didn't look spectacular. If you know me, you know I'm a sucker for dazzle paint. Some of the biggest names in the ocean liner game were converted into troop ships and hospital ships, including the Olympic, Mauretania, Aquitania, Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth II, Leviathan, and Britannic, among many, many others. Ocean liners converted into troop ships and hospital ships were critical during World Wars I and II because of their large capacity, speed, and the ability to easily convert them for wartime service. Speed was the greatest protection against these speedy submarines and airplanes that could take out slower ships. Some ocean liners were so fast they could outrun their escorts, like RMS Aquitania. As hospital ships, ocean liners had plenty of space for many wounded soldiers and medical staff, and the speed to get out of a dangerous war zone quickly. Unfortunately, ocean liners were not immune to the dangers of war, and some were lost in both world wars. Notably, HMHS Britannic, a White Star liner, converted into a hospital ship that sank on November 21, 1916 after colliding with a sea mine during World War I. And in World War II, HMT Lancastria was sunk by German aircraft while transporting upwards of 9,500 people on June 17, 1940. Ocean liners, while tougher than most ships, still sank. But our community continues to sail on. If you're enjoying this episode and want to hear more about ships, their careers, and their wrecks, check out our main show, Shipwreck Sunday, every Sunday night at 4 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Okay friends, let's look at a few notable examples and what happens to ships that survive wartime service. Ships that survived their conversions and made it to the other side of the wars faced one of two fates, depending upon their age, the need for the ship, and other factors. The first fate was the most ideal, which was that these ships would then go into the shipyard for repairs to be repainted and have their furnishings put back in place, becoming the ocean liners they once were prior to the war. RMS Olympic, RMS Mauretania, and RMS Queen Mary all survived the war and returned to passenger service, having careers that lasted years after their wartime service. RMS Queen Mary survives to this day and stands as a museum ship and hotel in Long Beach, California. RMS Aquitania did technically return to passenger service briefly after World War II, but it was for one final mission, to transport war brides and their children to Canada under charter from the Canadian government. Halifax, Nova Scotia had a special fondness for the ship after this, and the ship sailed her final commercial voyage from Halifax to Southampton in November and December of 1949. She was then taken from service and scrapped, like many ships were at the end of wartime service. We've mentioned a few notable examples of converted ocean liners, but I'd like to mention a few Japanese examples to stay on theme with this week's Shipwreck Sunday episode. First, let's look at Shinyo. Shinyo, which means Divine Hawk in Japanese, was an escort carrier operated by the Imperial Japanese Navy, but she didn't start out this way. First, she was the German ocean liner Scharnhorst, and the ship had been trapped in Kure, Japan following the outbreak of World War II in Europe, which prevented any attempt for the ship to return to Germany. And so, the Japanese took advantage of the ship and converted her into what they needed, an escort carrier, following the losses after the Battle of Midway. While in the East China Sea in 1944, she was sunk by an American submarine. The next ship we'll look at is Unyo, meaning Cloud Hawk, a Taiyo-class escort carrier originally built as the ocean liner Yawata Maru. She was converted into an escort carrier in 1942, again after the loss of 4 aircraft carriers at the Battle of Midway. Though we do have to note, she was requisitioned prior to the Battle of Midway, and she was initially used to transport prisoners of war. She was beautiful as Yawata Maru, being built in 1938 and serving just 1 short year before the Imperial Japanese Navy called upon her once more, converting her to an aircraft carrier, but still retaining the iconic sharp bow of an ocean liner. She was sunk by an American submarine in 1944. Next, we look at Kayo, which means Sea Hawk, and again, she was an escort carrier that was converted from an ocean liner. Originally, she was built in 1938 as MV Argentina Maru, and she operated as a passenger ship until December 9, 1942, when she was requisitioned for wartime service. She then underwent an 11-month-long conversion into an escort carrier, becoming Kayo. Most of these ships retained their iconic ocean liner bow, and Kayo's was incredibly prominent, despite how awkward she might have looked. She was scrapped in 1945. This one is a little different, and the awesome thing is this ship still exists. The Hikawa Maru is a retired Japanese ocean liner that is now a museum ship at Yamashita Park, Yokohama. She was one of 3 Hikawa Maru-class motor ships, all named after major Shinto shrines. Both of her sister ships, also converted for usage in World War II, were lost, the Haien Maru and Hie Maru. Hikawa Maru was converted into a hospital ship just a week before the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 1, 1941. She survived being damaged by mines not once, not twice, but 3 times during the Second World War, showing that she was a true survivor. She would go back to passenger service after the war, and then she was retired in 1960. She was preserved in 1961 and survived nearly being scrapped in 2006, now being officially designated as an important cultural property by the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology of Japan as of August 17, 2016. And finally, this week's star of the show, Hyo. Hyo, which means flying hawk in Japanese, was originally planned as the ocean liner Izumo Maru, and construction had just begun when she was sold to the Imperial Japanese Navy for conversion. Her construction was altered to become an escort aircraft carrier. For her entire life cycle, she'd be plagued by bad luck, and we'll get more into that this Sunday. She'd participate in multiple engagements, the largest of which being her last, the Battle of the Philippine Sea. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Hyo was struck by a torpedo from aircraft launched from USS Bella Wood, and she exploded and sank quickly. Both belligerents of World Wars I and II utilized ocean liners to their fullest capacity, understanding that these quick, large-capacity ships could mean winning or losing the war. Whether they were troop ships, armed merchant cruisers, hospital ships, or even converted into aircraft carriers, ocean liners supplied multiple militaries with the hulls they needed. The ocean liner escort aircraft carrier hybrid cut through the ocean as she and the rest of her fleet made their way to the Philippines. Silent, large, and fast, she moved forward into what would be her final battle. But she and her crew didn't know it yet. On this Sunday's episode of Shipwreck Sunday, we get into her final battle and explosive end.